So hi there everyone and welcome along to ONA NYC's panel this evening. This is called Coping with the New Normal. And you may or may not know this already if you joined earlier. My name is Emma Silikans. I'm on the ONA local board for New York City and I'll be your moderator for this evening. Now, as you all know, we're in pretty unprecedented times right now. I don't know about you, but I didn't think that I would be sitting here in my living room talking to you for an ONA panel. I certainly didn't think that sometimes my bed would be my office. I didn't think that some of my colleagues would be at work at a time when there's a global pandemic. And I've got other friends, and I'm sure you do as well, who have lost their jobs at this time. So we're experiencing something in journalism that we haven't experienced before. And that's why we wanted to host this panel, because you do tend to go through an emotional and mental toll when there's a big change in the way that we operate. So we've pulled together a panel of experts and members across the news business who we think are going to be great at speaking to this new normal. They're also people that are trying to make a difference in their own unique way. So as we're talking through this panel this evening, they'll hopefully be shining the light on some of the things that they're doing to cope with what's going on, this new normal, but also giving advice to all of you with how they may be able to help you at this time. So a quick thanks to Mark Rack, who have helped us put together this evening, and a few more housekeeping items as well. We're going to be live tweeting on our @ONA NYC Twitter page. So if you want to join on Twitter as well, you can do so. So on our panel this evening, we have Kari, who is the Senior Associate Director for the Rosalynn Carter Fellowships for Mental Health and Journalism, Mental Health Journalism and Media at the Carter Center. And you should have her details there available for Twitter if you'd like to tweet. Welcome to Dr. Rodriguez, who is the Director of Trauma-Informed Services at NYU's McSilver Institute. And we also, as part of our panel, have Benet Wilson, who's a credit cards editor at The Points Guy. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, but I will share it again a little bit later on with some resources. Welcome along to everyone. Hopefully my lovely panelists have their microphones and their cameras turned on. And to get started for this evening, we've welcomed you here because you all have unique I believe, and ONA NYC believes, you have unique views on what's going on right now, and you've also been trying to help in your own endeavors. So I would love it if we can start off the panel with just you talking about what your new normal is right now and how you're coping. So maybe let's start with Benet.
Well, for me, it's been really interesting because I've actually worked from home since 2014. So when I found out that it was going to be stay in place, to me, it was just another day until it wasn't. Because, you know, all of my coworkers were home. I have a surly 14-year-old teenager at home. And I can't go out. It's different when you work from home and you can go out and do what you need to do. So it was a bit more of an adjustment than I thought it would be. But I have plenty of tips and coping mechanisms. Plus, I'm an extrovert, so that kind of has been a stressor too.
You don't say. And you join us from Baltimore this
Yes.
evening, don't you? Okay, great. We might rotate through to Jim. How are you going with this new normal right now? How are you coping, and where are you joining us from this evening?
Well, I'm joining you from Westchester, New York, and I am coping pretty well. I mean, the transition, I think similar to Benet, I'm used to working from home, not all the time, but I work remotely at least a couple of days a week and sometimes more often. After this, I think I'm going to work remotely even more and use that flexibility. So in some ways, the transition to working remotely hasn't been as shocking. And in some ways, you know, sort of being able to sort of manage and set in routines that are also, you know, healthy and maintaining my own health mentally and physically throughout this has been a priority, because even though, you know, I'm used to it, you do have to think about and plan for how you're going to sort of take care of yourself. But other than that, and then of course, you know, the daily concerns and worries that we all have from listening to the news and questions around uncertainty of the future and all of that impacting me just as it is everyone else. is the main, obviously the main issue that I've been sort of working through.
Yeah, and I think it's important at this time to note as well that you've had 20 years working in the area of trauma, and you're probably a little bit more used to, I guess, what it is that we're all experiencing right now. You're probably the leading expert, I would say, in this here this evening in terms of like advice that we can take away from this. So I'll look forward to drawing on some of those skill sets a little bit later on as we move through the panel. And Kari, how are you coping with this new normal from where you are, and what does your new normal look like?
Well, I'm in Atlanta, and I've had previous roles where I had to work, where I worked from home, and it was fine. This is a little bit different because I'm used to. I live 27 miles from my job, so I spend, if you've heard of Atlanta traffic, you know how much fun it is. And so I spend quite a bit of time, or I used to spend, I should say, quite a bit of time commuting. With my job, I also travel a lot internationally in the Middle East and in Latin America. And then I have two small children, one is 2 and one is 7. And so I went from the 2-year-old is in daycare and the 7-year-old is in elementary school. So I went from traveling, working in the office, and having 2 kids in school to suddenly all of this being at home. And so just trying to manage, continuing to run the program that I run, to homeschool our 7-year-old, to figure out how to keep the 2-year-old occupied. And I do not miss the commute. So I'm just I honestly just figure it out every day. And if you asked me 2 days ago how I was doing, I'd say not very well. Today, I think I had a good day, and that's just how it's going day to day. I'm trying to take care of my mental health, but it doesn't always work because that's the reality.
I hear that. And we're allowing participants in as time goes by. Marjorie, can you pop yourself on mute, please?
Yes.
I can just hear you there. That would be great. Thank you. We're just asking any participants that join to please just mute themselves so that the panelists can be heard. And just to give you a little bit of background as well, you just heard from Kari, the main reason we invited her along this evening, she's created a great list of resources for people, particularly journalists that may be dealing with trauma at this time, that may have mental health issues, and also may need COVID-19 resources. So she's created this amazing set of resources that we'll definitely be drawing on throughout this panel. And Benet, I should have mentioned earlier, is doing some great sessions every Wednesday night with journalists of color in particular around mental health check-ins, where you can check in via Zoom with her, and those have been running each week along this pandemic, pretty much ever since we got locked down and had to experience this new normal in New York, in the US, and right across the world. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining me. And if you're concerned that people aren't joining the panel, it's okay. I see some of my ONA NYC fellows asking about this. I'm admitting people as they join in. I don't have the ability to assign a co-host right now, so I just thought I would let you know. And my name's Emma Silikans, if you've joined as well. I'm on the ONA NYC board, and I've got some great members of our board as well who are helping behind the scenes here this evening. Alita's going to be pulling together all of your questions when we go into a Q&A a little bit later on. Mandy, Rabina, Alana, John, Ruben, and Cheryl have all been helping behind the scenes. So I'd like to say a big thank you to them as well. And hopefully everyone can see our lovely panelists up there on the screen. We've got Benet J. Wilson, Jim Rodriguez, who is a doctor with 20 years experience in trauma in particular, and Kari Cobham is with us as well. So we might skip through to our second question of this evening. I don't know about you, but working from home has been an interesting challenge. We touched on it with some of the kids that you have at home, but I wonder what advice you have for our participants around finding a balance when it comes to working at home in particular. What is your home space? What is your workspace? How do you make sure you're showing up for work, but also taking the time you need to have time at home? And we might start with, we'll go to Jim this time first.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you hit the word, which is balance. It is, in fact, sort of, as we go through this crisis, there's a balance between how we approach it, right? We have to be, on the one hand, extremely cautious, and on the other hand, reassuring and hopeful, right? Because if we're just caught up in the caution, we can get overwhelmed and fearful. So we have to find that balance cognitively in our minds and how we approach this. So there's work going on internally. But in terms of finding that balance, I mean, I think it really does start with planning and routine. I know that can sound overly simplistic, but because this has happened over time or so slowly and rolled out so slowly, in many ways, this is a mass disaster, just to be clear. In some ways very similar to a 9/11, but very different because of the way it's rolled out. So many people kind of went into remote mode with no clear idea of how long it was going to last, how long it was going to end. And that remote mode could have ended up being something that required some changes in planning, but it didn't really hit us right away, right? We kind of just went along with it and kind of waited around to see what things were going to happen. And now, and I have some clients that I work with. So I also should say I have a private practice, so I do work with clients. And one of them was talking about how at first with their kids, they just thought, it's a little extended vacation. Yeah, we got to deal with it for a few days. But as the weeks have gone by, they've begun to notice that that stressors are coming in, that the kids are sort of jumping out of their skin, that they need more attention. So again, as the work goes through, it does involve intentionality, right? Planning. And of course, it starts with routines. So, and that's one of the things that this whole situation has interfered with is our daily routines. And we cherish our daily routine, right? It's our walk to the office. It's that coffee we pick up on the way to the office. We have our ways of settling into work. All of that could be in part disrupted. So one of the things I would say is think about the routines. Think about the things that you did in the past that were routine-like and that you can either continue to do or mimic in some way and continue to do those. So think about those things that help you set a routine and develop some continuity in your life and have some predictability in your life. Because one of the things that's happening right now, right, is we live in an inherently unpredictable world with uncertainty. Bring as much predictability as you can to the situation. So again, that's where routines become important and thinking about a schedule for yourself. And then oh yeah.
Sorry, no, we might rotate back to speaking a little bit more about routines in a moment. Was there anything else in particular around finding that balance in the home and denoting, sorry, apologies, the work versus home space that you had before we cycle through to some of our other panelists?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the routines start with, again, finding out what are the things that you need to do. And I think that you need to, of course, take care of work. You need to, if you have children, obviously take care of children. And you also need to take care of yourself, right? So I think that's, and I also want to be clear that there's this balance between your responsibilities to others and to your work, but also to yourself. And so I say that when you think about the routines, you want to figure out, again, where do I get my work done? When and how can I be most productive, right? How do I handle, and again, all of this is easier said than done, I realize, but sort of where is the family time and where is the time for relationships and where is the time for me to stay connected to the people in the house? And then there's how do I find me time in all this? Now, again, that can be even more difficult, but trying to find that private time, that time where you can take care of yourself in whatever way you have learned to cope and take care of yourself in the past, and finding that balance, and then being very mindful about how you do that. One other thing I want to say about it is, and I mentioned this also, is finding worry time. And what I mean by that is, and you all as journalists, I realize this is much easier said than done. You have to stay connected. You have to get the information. And so it's all out there. But I think for sort of the general population, I think it's critical, and for you all as well, is right, where do I get my information from? How much information am I taking in? How connected? And then trying to find that time to do that, to worry, to think about what's going on, to process what's happening. And in your cases, report on it, write stories about it, all of that kind of stuff, but then also disconnect.
Okay, so carving out time and carving out particular spaces
Yeah,
to be able to
and
cope.
literally in some cases, you know, sort of scheduling the worry time. Okay, I'm really worried about this during this time. And again, because you can worry about this all the time, every minute of the day.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Thanks so much, Jim. Jim has 20 years experience in dealing with trauma. He's over across at the NYU McSilver Institute and works there. We've also got Kari, who's joining us from the Carter Center. And we've got Bené Wilson on our panel. She is with the Point Sky. And they've all been invited along this evening, especially to the people that have just joined. I'm trying to get you up to speed because they have unique experiences in the area of coping with this new normal, and they're all trying to do something in their own way to help as part of this bigger picture. So Kari, Cobham, I know that your life has changed a little bit with the 2 kids at home. When you're working from home, what advice do you have to people on finding a balance? How do you set out that workspace, that sort of home space? What would you like to impart on people?
All right. You know, a few years ago, I kind of gave up on the idea of balance. And I spoke to the Women's Leadership Academy, and Kristen here and Eli talked about work-life chemistry and the fact that the chemistry changes from day to day. And so sometimes balance might be impossible, but you sort of shift the chemistry around based on your needs on any given day. And for me, that's kind of how I am surviving, because I have different deadlines with work, and the children have different needs at different ages, and they have stuff related to school. And so looking at it in terms of work-life chemistry day to day has helped me not just prioritize what needs to be done, but also give myself grace when maybe I'm not doing as well as I was the day before, or, you know, some days I might be very productive and some days I might not. The one thing that I make sure to do every day is not to do any work in my bedroom. That's it. And you know, the children sort of have the run of the house, and I have my deadlines. And as Jim mentioned, you know, it took a while to find the routine and find the things that work for me. And so what I have found is that waking up really early in the morning before the kids wake up to get a couple of hours in, and then getting a couple of hours in at the end of the day after they go to sleep, being able to be selective about the calls that I'm on during the day, and then prioritize my deadlines and sort of knock things out as I need to, has helped a lot. But that's what I need to do. But I've also had to be flexible about, in terms of my family life, because now that everybody's home, it all kind of spills, you know, it kind of merges. And so I can very well say, I'm gonna get this project done, but then you have someone coming in sideways saying, I want some cereal. And so it's really just a matter of getting as much as I can done at the times that I can, especially during nap time, and recognizing there's only so much I can get done throughout the day, and really easing up on myself about that, because there's there's a sense of like, I have to be productive, I have to be early on this deadline, I have to do this, I have to do that, and really just kind of negotiating with the people that I work with, and delegating with my team and working with my team to make sure that the work is getting done. But there's an understanding that this is a different kind of normal that we are existing in. And, you know, I have kids at home, other people have older parents that they're living with. There are multi-generations under one roof. People are dealing with other health issues and other concerns. So the professional spills into the personal, and it's a combination of recognizing that that is happening. How do you maintain some semblance of the work so you can still reach the goals where you want to help people in a positive way or keep people informed, but also understanding that everyone is in a different headspace at different times, and giving yourself that level of grace and giving the people that you work with that level of grace. And also giving your children that level of grace, because as an adult, you have different ways of coping, and you have more practice in coping, and it comes out for them in other ways. So if you don't have a good day, then they have days when they don't have a good day either. And so how do you manage your expectations around your own mental and emotional needs and theirs? And it's a lot, but again, it's chemistry. It's chemistry on a day-to-day basis, and just figuring out, what do I need today? What do they need today? How am I feeling today? How much can I manage today? How much homeschooling can I take without losing my mind? How much deadlines do I have today? That sort of thing. But really, I really wanted to reiterate that it can be difficult to find balance, and that is okay. Nobody is perfectly balanced in a regular situation. So in a crisis, just, think through your needs at the given time.
Great, thanks so much, Kari, Cobham, and oh, I'm hearing myself back in my ears, lovely. Kari Cobham is the Senior Associate Director over at the Rosalynn Carter Fellowships for Mental Health Journalism and Media at the Carter Center. And we're talking about coping with the new normal here with ONA NYC. My name's Emma Silikans, and we've got three great panelists that are here this evening unpacking that for you if you've just joined. Benet Wilson, I imagine you have some thoughts on this as well in terms of working from home. I understand you're no stranger to working from your home. So perhaps you want to clue us in on what you do to find that balance, and even if balance itself is not necessarily achievable, how you think about that and what advice you might have for others. By the way, Kari, I love the advice of not working from the bedroom.
And that was one thing. I live in Baltimore. Rents are not nearly as high as they are in New York. So I actually have an office in my apartment. And there's a balcony so I can open the door and get some fresh air. But it's, don't work in your bedroom, find another space. You have to have a clearly delineated space. I don't want to go into my bedroom with my laptop and, that's my relaxed space. So I have a desk. I have a giant monitor. I just ordered a brand new chair because I had an old chair and I deserve a new chair. So having that space, and then getting your schedule together. My child is older, she's 14, but this is her first year of high school. She misses her friends, she's bored, and she's an only child, and her father is immune compromised, so she's not seeing him. So we're kind of balancing all of that. But it's hard to say have a schedule because everything is just not set. Something will happen, but as much as you can do it, be on a schedule. And at the end of my day, I turn off my computer and I walk out of my office, and that's it. If you're in your bedroom and the laptop is right there, you're going to get up, you'll see it in the corner, and you'll pick it up because you can't resist, and you'll start doing work. And I just say there has to come a point where you have to turn it off, even though we're in interesting times. I know some of my friends, their employers, they're struggling with this because their employers are like, well, you're at home, you have nothing better to do, so why can't you do this? And it's like, no, you have to draw that line. There are things that pop up, but you really have to, it's really tough, but you have to draw that line between your homework time and your home time.
I think I just lost you for a second there. Did anyone else lose the end of Benet's sentence there, or is it just my lovely internet in Washington Heights, New York right now? Everyone else, give me a thumbs up if you were hearing Benet okay. Okay, good, radio. So it must just be me and my fun and games in Washington Heights. Also, you will probably hear some loud banging coming on at 7 o'clock. And I'm sure, as most of you know, in New York City, everyone's been cheering for the essential workers at 7 p.m. So I think it would be lovely if you would like to just do a silent clap or a little bit of a clap for the essential workers that are out there today. And I do apologize if you're hearing that noise in the background. background from one of our panelist speakers. That's unavoidable, but I also think that it's a really nice thing to be shouting out to the people that are doing the jobs that they're doing right now. It might be journalists out in the field still doing their jobs. It may be health workers. It may be the people that are delivering our Amazon packages. So a big shout out and thank you to them at this time. I'm Emma Silicon. Thank you for joining in the ONA NYC panel on This Is the New Normal. I'm loving seeing everyone's claps. Yes, that's awesome. And New York City, it's super loud at 7 p.m. I'm not sure if it's happening across the country or where you are overseas as well. If you're just joining into the panel and I've admitted you, just make sure you are on mute. If you should automatically be on mute as you join, but if you're not, just make sure that you are so that we just allow our panelists to be heard at this time. Now, one thing that I know that I've been discussing with a lot of my friends is this idea, and you brought it up a little bit earlier as well, around being productive. Some people just are making these like amazing things and they look to be doing these incredible endeavors. And then I talk to some of my friends that are comatose on the couch going, I just don't even know what to think or feel. How much pressure should we be under right now to be feeling productive? Is it okay to be on the couch in fetal position? What is the new normal right now, and how much pressure should we be putting on ourselves? I might start with Kari on answering this one. If you just joined us, Kari is over at the Carter Center and she's created a great list of resources for journalists that are dealing either with mental health issues themselves or mental health reporting, and resources around COVID-19 at this time. Kari, I'll let you jump in, and I'm going to mute myself because I know it's very noisy in the background here in New York.
No, you're fine. You can totally leave it on. You know, one of my really good friends is a therapist, and she said to me, there is no should, you know, if I should be doing this or should be doing that. And I'm like, make me a t-shirt with that on it, because there really is no should. To be honest with you, there are days when I'm curled in a fetal position on the couch. And then there are days where I'm like, all right, let's be productive. And I knock a bunch of work out and I take the kids outside and we do a bunch of fun stuff and I meet some deadlines. And it's just the understanding that some days are going to be tough and some days are going to be okay, and just rolling with it. I know that people cope with things in different ways. And for some people it is, I have to be productive to keep myself distracted, to feel purposeful, to be engaged on a social level, etc. And that works. And then sometimes there's a tipping point where you can't function, you can't move, you can't think too far ahead, or else you just start to shut down, or you have too much on your plate or not enough on your plate. It's a stressful time. It's a crisis. And so I think it's really just doing what works for you. And if it is on that given day that you need to be productive and you feel like you need to produce or you need to contribute in some way, then by all means. And of course, there's the required work that we have to do as journalists, right? So reminding ourselves not just that we have to do the work, but why we're doing the work and the importance of the work, and keeping people informed and serving our communities. And then recognizing that, hey, there are going to be times when I'm not going to want to get out of bed. I'm not going to want to get off the couch. I'm not going to want to function today, and giving yourself space to feel those things. So I think it's okay for all of that to coexist, because we're going to run the gamut of emotions as we go through this prolonged process.
Thanks, Kari Cobham. And Dr. Rodriguez, I imagine you've probably got a lot to say on this particular side of things around this topic. Just to remind people, Dr. Rodriguez is a licensed psychologist and clinical social worker and has been in the field of trauma for 20 years. And we were just talking about, the question to the panelists was around this need to create amazing things, or perhaps there's no need to do it. Perhaps it's okay just to be on the couch. What is okay and what isn't right now? And we've been talking through that in different shoulds and shouldn'ts and regards. So Dr. Rodriguez, I imagine you have a lot to say around, how should people be feeling about the fact that, some days they may feel the pressure to be creating and doing these things, and other days, they may be on the couch in fetal position.
Yeah, I think, and that is right on. So one of the things that we talk about with trauma is this idea that, so anyone who, when we talk about trauma, we think about horrible things happening to people. And one of the things that can happen as a result of being exposed to trauma, whether it's severe abuse or a natural disaster, is to, in some ways, blame yourself, right? So that what all of this does is really tax our ability to cope and deal. Stress can overwhelm, and I'll be happy to talk later a little bit about stress and the stress reaction and how all of that unfolds biologically, but it is impossible not to be stressed and not to have your coping taxed during this time. And so I think Kari is right on when she says that in many ways, one of the things that we have to try to avoid is the pressure to react in some imagined perfect way. There is none, right? We are not necessarily prepared to deal with this all the time. Our bodies are very well prepared to deal with stress in spurts. In fact, there is such a thing as positive stress. It is the stress that allows you to get your work done, meet your deadlines, right? What we are approaching for many of us is intolerable stress. And what some of us may go through is toxic stress. And those are the things that can happen. And so certainly one of the things that can do that is putting extreme pressure on ourselves to either produce more or to react perfectly in this situation. So I think Kari's advice from her friend that there are no shoulds, right? I think that can often happen. I should be able to handle this. I should be able to react this way. I should be able to stay on the straight and narrow and be productive. And those things can be harmful mentally. And so, and again, as I said, I can certainly talk a little bit more about why that happens. And there is a biological reason why that happens. But I think those are some of the things that you have to be aware of. And then I think even more importantly, though, I think it's that awareness. And I think what Kari was describing is that awareness of herself, that deep understanding of what she's going through and being aware of what's happening, which is the critical piece to all this. Because I think you can be taken off guard if you're not processing what's happening, if you're not aware that you are feeling stressed, if you are not aware that you're feeling overwhelmed, and that you can give yourself this break. What's happened to some people is that little by little, they begin to develop unhealthy, unhelpful coping strategies that stick.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to touch on that in a moment on those coping mechanisms. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm Emma Silikans. You're here with ONA NYC. We're hosting a panel on coping with the new normal, and we have three great panelists with us. Benet J. Wilson, Jim Rodriguez, who is a doctor with 20 years experience in trauma, and Kari Cobham, who's from the Carter Center. Benet, we haven't got to you on this question yet, but we might circle back around. We'll try and keep our responses relatively brief because we don't have a lot of time. We don't want to be in here all night. I know the temptation is for us to keep talking, but we'd like to keep it to just over an hour. But Benet, in terms of that challenge of, feeling the pressure to create these incredible things and be productive versus the other feelings that are happening at this time, how are you coping with those? And what's coming up perhaps in the group that you formed on Wednesday night? Journalists of color have been joining you in sessions to talk through their mental health. Perhaps they've brought up some questions or some coping mechanisms that you can talk through.
Yes, well, I am a crafter. I'm a quilter. So I joined the Million Mask Challenge and jumped right in and have been making masks like a mad woman. But then I just felt overwhelmed, but then I felt guilty because I know all these people need these masks. And then I said, well, I have to stop. I had to stop, and I had to just get in the bed and watch a couple of episodes of Joe Tiger. Yeah, I'm admitting that I watched it, but you know, you have to have that balance, like Kari said. So when I want to do the masks, I do them and I get them out. And when I'm tired and I don't want to do them, I just stop. A lot of people in our group, we've started a book club, so we're reading books. We're talking about television shows that we're watching. There are a lot of us in that group who are crafty, so we're doing little craft challenges. But no one is feeling, you know, the emphasis is what Kari said. You shouldn't feel obligated to do anything. And if people make you feel bad, you shouldn't feel bad, because you have to cope the way that's best for you.
Yeah, totally understand that. And just on coping mechanisms, Jim brought that up earlier, and I think it's a nice segue into a question around that. Everyone has different coping mechanisms, and we are dealing with COVID-19. We are dealing with our new normal, and everyone does so in different ways. I know for me, I've been drinking a lot more alcohol than I normally would. I've been taking a lot more walks than I normally would. I've started running again. I nearly vomited this morning because I had put so much pressure on myself to run, because I felt like I needed to be doing something to, you know, cope with what was going on. And I'm sure there's other people out there like me that are dealing with this at this time. So perhaps we'll go to Jim to start off with. Jim has 20 years experience in trauma. You've probably heard that as we've been cycling through the panel, but I know that new people are joining us. So I'm just trying to reiterate where we're at and who our panelists are. But perhaps you can answer that around coping mechanisms. Maybe you can clue us into what yours are, how we sort of avoid falling into perhaps a destructive pattern, and where's the line on that? And we might just keep it brief as we're cycling through. I imagine you'll probably have a lot of resources and advice on this.
Yeah, and it's a lot. And I think the difficult thing, just to be clear, is that, you know, coping is a lot like good fashion. You know, one size fits all doesn't always work. And so what ends up being good coping depends on the individual. And I realize that's a little bit too soft. I mean, I could certainly, as I said, when I talked earlier about the notion of routines, the idea is to try to figure out how you can, you know, think about the ways that you cope and integrate that into your day. But it can be very different. For some people, coping is meditation, it's yoga. For other people, it's running. For other people, it's dancing and singing. And there's different types of coping, right? So one is internal work, calming, relaxing. What relaxes you? What calms your body down and regulates your emotions when you're feeling revved up, right? But there can also be, so it's more categories that you want to think of as opposed to specific things. Because as I said, what calms me down might not be what calms you down, right? A warm bath might calm you down. A good run might calm me down. It could be different. So that's one thing. So, but one category is the self-regulation, the emotional regulation, what calms you down. Another sort of category might be distractions, right? Where can I put my energy or my thoughts that are not in worrisome things, right? So where do I distract myself? That could be those things that I said, listening to music or engaging with pleasant sounds and things like that. So there's another sort of category around the things that kind of distract you and get your mind off your worries. And that's another sort of category of coping. And then yet another category of coping is, yeah, what are those things I need to do? So it could, you know, sort of maintaining some engagement to those things that you need to do to take care of those so that they're not accumulating in your mind and just picking up and sort of getting put on a things to do list, an endless things to do list. And then as we mentioned earlier, the connections, right? How do you feel? How do you get connected to others? How do you maintain? We are social beings. We need to maintain connections with others. So it's these categories. I like to think about also these three pillars of resilience and that is safety. And I think that we cover pretty clearly with all the things that we're doing to stay safe. Regulation, which is how we regulate our emotions and how we regulate our physiology and our feeling states and And then lastly, those connections that are critically important. How do I maintain those connections with other people that are critically important to me and that help sustain me? And then, yes, as I think as Kari mentioned earlier, and I do think it's an important point, right? The sort of the being okay with things as they are and accepting things for where they are at this moment, and accepting some of the ambiguity, some of the difficulties, and in a mindful way being with it. And I realize that can sometimes be a little bit difficult for folks to engage with, but that acceptance that things are how they are, and you can move on from them.
We're talking about coping mechanisms right now, and everyone has their own. You might find that you cycle through different ones as time goes by. For me, it's been doing face masks sometimes, it's been running other times, it's been having a drink sometimes, it's been watching Netflix over and over and over again. But Dr. Rodriguez was just saying that it's being really self-aware about what those things may be and at what point they become destructive. It's also about knowing which ones are distractions, and also knowing how much is too much, just being really self-aware in the different pillars of resilience. And I think those are really great pieces of advice that we could take away from this. My name's Emma Silikans. You're here with ONA NYC. We've got about 60 participants on this evening, which is just great to see on our panel on coping with the new normal. COVID-19 has kind of thrown us into this state of change, and we're all trying to grapple and cope with that right now. So we spoke with Jim around the coping mechanisms, but perhaps Kari, you want to jump in and let us know around coping mechanisms. You did mention a few things earlier, but perhaps you want to mention around how you're coping and what advice you have around coping and not falling into some of those traps, those more destructive mechanisms.
Yeah, I'll actually share a quick personal story, which I think you and I talked about, and folks who know me already know. But a few years ago, I went through a very difficult pregnancy. And so I did end of life planning during the pregnancy. And then my son came early. And so he was premature. And then he spent some time in the NICU. And then when he was released, they sent him home on an apnea monitor, which is basically a heart monitor that tells you when they stop breathing. And when it went off, we would basically have to make sure he was breathing and revive him. And we had to do CPR for infants before they would release him. And he was born at around 4 pounds. And it was tough, but it felt like it was basically over a 2-year ordeal that at the time, like now I can say it was about 2 years, but at the time we didn't know when it was going to end. And I remember talking to my therapist, and she said, I can't tell you that tomorrow is going to be any better. And I can't tell you that the situation is going to improve in 6 months or a year, or, what your son's health is going to be like. So there is no end in sight to the trauma, but I want you to tell me one thing that you do every day that makes you feel better. And I said it was taking a shower, a hot shower by myself. And she asked me why, and I told her why. And she said, okay, I want you to take every day, instead of taking a 3-minute hot shower, I want you to take a 6-minute hot shower. And that is your only homework. You don't need to focus on anything else. Do not go to the spa. You don't have to book a manicure. You don't have to start meditation. You don't have to do anything miraculous. Pick one small thing that you can achieve every day. Don't think about when this is going to end. Think about what's going to make you feel okay for today. Now, if I had said, I'm going to drink excessively or I'm going to do drugs, it would have been a whole different conversation. But I said I was going to take a shower, and she said, great, you do that. And, as Dr. Rodriguez said, it depends on you and what is going to work for you. And for me, I've fallen back into my habit of taking 6-minute hot showers. I'm also reading sci-fi and fantasy at night right before I go to sleep, because it gives me something to escape to. No nonfiction. Nonfiction is too much like reality, right? Or I will watch something on Netflix with a friend of mine, and we'll text each other. And so those are the things that work for me. They are not huge, they're not life-changing, but they are, because they work for me. And so I would say my coping mechanisms have been the reachable things that make me feel better every single day. And there are days that maybe I don't get to it, and that's okay. I get to them the next day. But we can't think about it as, when is this going to end? Because that's when you stop functioning. You just make it through and do what's right for you at the time. And that's one lesson that I took out of that life crisis that I'm applying to this one, which is, don't go big, just go personal and make sure that it works for you.
Kari, Cobham, I love that answer. That's just, it was resonating with me so hard. I'm nodding as I go, and I don't know if there's anyone else of the 60 participants in the audience that are really feeling that as well. Just for you, it's a 6-minute shower. For someone else, it might be teaching a ballet class online or watching the Met Opera. And I just love the heart and soul that you answered that question with. Kari Cobham is at the Carter Center, and she's created a list of resources for journalists dealing with COVID-19, dealing with mental health issues, covering mental health, and that's all available online, and we'll share those resources a little bit later on. I believe they're in our chat at the moment, and we're just talking around coping mechanisms. And Benet, I don't think we circled back to you on coping mechanisms. Have you got anything you'd like to share at this time with the participants in this panel, and also on the group, just around coping at this time? And just a reminder, Benet is with the Points Guy, and she also has this great group on a Wednesday night that if you want to join in, it's mostly journalists of color at the moment, I believe. I'm not sure if it is open to everyone. It is open to everyone, and it's just
it's the Journalist of Color Slack. So
Journalist of Color Slack. Yeah, and it's a great chat to just share what's going on at this time. And she established that at the start of this whole COVID-19 pandemic. So around coping, Benet, I'll throw to you.
Well, I'm an extrovert, so this has been excruciating. So Zoom, I already had a Zoom Pro account because I do a lot of teaching. And so now I'm using it to socialize. I mean, I'm using it for the Journalist of Color Slack. I do a random chat with people every Tuesday. I have wildly disparate group of friends. And so every Tuesday, I never know who's going to show up, and we all chat. I have chats with my girlfriends on the weekend. My daughter is really into TikTok, and she has been teaching me TikTok dances. I never would have done that. She's also really into makeup. So on Sunday afternoon, she did this wild makeup that I never would have done. But, you know, and just going out, we have a little green space out right outside the door, and I go out there and just sit. I've become a huge fan of the Headspace app. I found that that has been really helpful just with being more mindful, helps me with sleeping, helps me kind of be more focused. It has a lot of different programs. So those are the things that I'm doing.
Thanks so much for sharing, Benet. Welcome along if you've just joined us. I'm Emma Silikans. We're with ONA NYC in a panel right now on coping with this new normal. 3 wonderful panelists that come from very different walks of life, but are all helping in their own way to contribute to helping everyone cope with what this new normal is. And they've come up with different resources in order to do that, and advice. Dr. Jim Rodriguez has been working for 20 years in trauma, and he's over at the McSilver Institute at NYU. Benet Wilson is at the Points Guy, but also has created this great conversation for journalists of color each Wednesday night during COVID-19. And Kari Cobham has created a list of resources through the Carter Center that you can access online for journalists, both covering mental health issues and dealing with mental health issues during COVID-19, and other resources that relate to COVID-19 as well. Thank you so much to everyone who is asking questions. If participants would like to ask some questions that it's over in the chat panel. You just click on the chat below and you can ask questions there. I'll be feeding those to our panelists in just a moment. I have so many questions. I've just got one last one that I feel is quite important before we cycle through to our wonderful participants and their questions. And we might start with Benet this time round and go backwards the other way. It's around connection and feeling connected. And I think that's come up a few times tonight. Introverts and extroverts may deal with this in different ways, but one thing we all need is that connection. And working from home, having shutdowns, being isolated can be challenging. So perhaps you can share your top piece of advice around that, and maybe any useful tools that you've found that you could pass on to others so that they can be connected. I thought TikTok was a great one with the dancing, but I'm sure, Benet, you have other ones. So we might start with you there.
Well, I mean, before this, I never really used Instagram Live. That's another thing when you're in a house with a teenager who can teach you all of this stuff. Zoom has really been my big one, to just, stay connected with people, talk to people. Slack also. I mean, I've got all these different channels that are going on all the time. I mentioned the book club with the Journalists of Color Slack, but my job, we also just decided to do a book club. And I love this because we're reading books. They're all fiction, Kari, so you'll be happy. But the first book was sci-fi fantasy. I've never read that genre, and I found out that I really like it. So it's just, you have permission to kind of do things a little differently. So, I mean, you give yourself that permission, and I mean, the worst that can happen is you don't like it, so you move on and go to the next one. So.
Thank you. Around advice on connection, Dr. Rodriguez, anything that you would share with people around connection at this time, and any tools that may be useful? Just obviously keeping it brief because we'd like to cycle through to some of the questions from the participants as well.
Yeah. I would probably just focus on, as I mentioned earlier, this idea of trying to keep what you can keep from your life before and add new things. And so when I think of it in those terms, it's important to some of the things that I've been doing, I'm sure others, right? Internet or Zoom, birthday parties, Zoom celebrations, family celebrations, trying to, as much as possible, if you can and have the means to do it, to maintain those kind of celebrations in ways you normally connect with people. So that this doesn't interfere too much with how you normally connect with folks. Again, maybe through a different medium, but staying connected with folks in the same way you might connect with them. Again, family celebrations, things like that. And then thinking about new and different ways, I think, as Benet has been suggesting, new and different ways to connect with others, being creative with how you connect with others. And then reaching out to those folks. I think the other thing that I always think about is, and this is also something I say, especially for those of you who have children, being mindful, right, that those children are going through these difficult times. They may need to be connected or stay connected with family members they may be worrying about, having those conversations with them about sort of how this is all affecting them and helping them to maintain contacts with others in their lives becomes critically important too.
Yeah, and it is nice. There is kind of a silver lining to all of this. I've found that, as you can probably hear from my accent, I'm not from America. I've been a lot more connected to my family and friends back in Australia just by having, Facebook chats and jumping online and having conversations far more often than usual. And that really is a silver lining. People that are checking in on me and I'm checking in on others that we haven't spoken in 3-5 years. And I'm not sure if you're feeling that as well when it comes to connection. Perhaps there is something lovely that we can draw out of this crazy situation that we're all in. Kari, Cobham, any areas that you think people should be looking to stay connected? Any tools that you'd like to share that you have found during this time?
Yeah, I mean, like you, I'm not from the US, I'm from Trinidad, and I've found WhatsApp to be great. I mean, I've always stayed in communication with my family via WhatsApp, but now that borders are closed, I can't travel, being able to FaceTime with, especially like my mom every other day, has been a huge help. I've also been doing daily updates for my friends and family that I consider extended family, across the world. So I'll send like an update and copy and paste with a picture of that sums up the day, which serves two purposes, right? And I may do it every other day, but one is it's kind of a running journal of what this experience has been like, but it also lets them know what I'm going through on any given day. For my 7-year-old, she has written letters to her friends and her teachers and been able to, and mailed those. I have been messaging regularly with a small group of friends just to check in. And that's all well and good. But I think there's some days where I'm like, you know, I can't check in on anyone today, or I'm not going to respond today. And I just sort of pull back from the need or the obligation to communicate, because unlike Benet, I'm an introvert. And while they say like, I have been planning for this, I've been waiting for this all my life, I have not. And we have our own issues dealing with it. But I do need time to unplug from everything and not have to check in on someone and not have to explain to someone how I'm feeling in the moment. So I kind of do a bit of both, right? Which is I do reach out and I do communicate. I've taken my toddler outside and we wave at the recycling guys as they go by, and they love that. So there is that. There is some socialization through technology and apps and in person from a distance, but it's okay if you just decide on that day, you know what, I'm not going to update anybody because I just need to plug in for today.
Yeah, totally understand. Thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts. And thank you to everyone that's joining us here this evening for ONA NYC's chat on coping with the new normal. Now, we've had a little bit of a fun question. This is a very New York question, but perhaps you've got some advice on this, and we want to keep it super short. But April Joyner from Reuters has asked, any advice for coping in a studio apartment right now? Benet, maybe you want to answer that one first. I know you've got a lot more space, but maybe you've heard from friends. Maybe you've got some creative ways that they can cope.
Oof. I lived in a studio apartment a long time ago. I mean, I live in a very large apartment and I feel the walls closing in. So I really sympathize. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, the only thing that I can think of is, you know, just kind of, I don't know the size of it, but, you know, walk from one end to the other. If you can just go outside of your door, if there's some green space or just some space outside that you can just change up the scenery, that's what I would recommend.
Okay, Jim?
Well, I would sort of follow that up with the question, is it on your own or with someone else? And what I would add, if you're living with someone else also, is to really set those boundaries around privacy time, right? So if you're in a one bedroom, if you're in a studio and you're not alone, one of the things that you could, and again, everything that Benet said as well, but if you're not alone also, really making sure that you're negotiating that private time. Like, I just need some me time, I need some separate time, I need some space, and really set, and so that folks can do the many things that have been suggested on here that they need to do to take care of themselves and have some me time, as well as some connecting time. But again, being mindful of that as well, of that privacy.
Yeah, Kari, Cobham?
So I don't live in a studio, but I have friends in New York who live in studios. I have one who put up a hammock in his place, and he works out of his hammock whenever he feels like it. I have someone else I saw on Twitter this week said that they switch up the chairs that they sit in every day. So whether it's the chairs at the table, if they have one in their house, or they sit on the couch or whatever, and avoid the bed. So just changing up the space, even if the space isn't big, kind of helps change up their daily perspective.
Okay, great. And another participant question that just came in, I believe this one's from Mandy Velez. how do you go about taking leave or PTO when you don't necessarily have anywhere to go? Often we'll plan these big holidays and we may be forced to take our vacation now because we've previously applied for it, or maybe we've got PTO because we've been working crazy hours. Any advice? We might just cycle back through Benet, Jim and Kari on that.
I just took 2 days of PTO off last week.
Woohoo!
Damn it, I needed it. And all I did, the first day I did do some sewing, and then I stopped. I watched some classic movies, I read my book club books, and then I took naps and just kind of went outside and walked. I did not feel the least bit guilty about taking those 2 days of PTO.
I love that. Jim?
I just echo what Benet said. Yes, during this time, take your time off. Give yourself a vacation from all of it, as much as you can, and separate if you have it. And again, with no guilt, and in fact embrace it. But I think that's critically important. I too I was thinking about it the other day, and I was like, I need a day off, and I didn't realize it. And I think that's the other thing, because our routines change and our schedules change, and we might not feel although many of us may feel more stressed. But yeah, you need the breaks and build those in.
Yeah, and rotating back to the studio conversation, Ruben Stern, who's on our ONA NYC board, he's saying he tries to put his laptop away in a bag so that he can't see it when he's not working. I think that's a great tip. I haven't managed that. I've got 2 laptops in front of me for this panel, one with my questions and one with all of you on it right now, plus a device in my hand. So I'm kind of failing at that one. And then Malaysia, hopefully I'm enunciating your name correctly, is saying that they took last week off because their son was on spring break, and that helps mentally. It was weird to go nowhere, but sometimes we just have to take time for ourselves. So thanks for, okay, your name rhymes with Felicia. Melisha, thank you so much for that advice there in the chat panel. And thank you so much for letting us know what it is that you did last week and the fact that you took some time off there. And Kari, Cobham, that question from Mandy, what do you think about that, taking time off when you don't necessarily have anywhere to go and we're kind of stuck at home with COVID-19? What would you say to that?
It might not be physical time off, but it's definitely mental time off. Last week, my kids were on spring break, and we were supposed to be on a cruise to Alaska, and I hear rumor that cruises were not a good idea. And so I woke up, I think, toward the end of the week, and I had one of those days where I'm like, I really want to curl up in a fetal position on the couch. And then I decided, you know what, I'm going to take the day off for my kids' spring break. And we're lucky enough to have a back porch. And taking the day off meant making sure I was okay with my supervisor and just not checking my email. And I set up my kids' pool on the back porch and laid out beach towels and pretended that we were having a beach day. And I mixed myself a cocktail, and we had nowhere to go. But I made sure that I was relaxing on that day and not thinking about work. And then the next day when I came back at it fresh, I had more to offer to my job. I could focus a little bit more, because if I had tried to work through that day in the place that I was in, I probably would not have been very productive, and it would not have been good for my mental health. So it's recognizing I'm not in a good place right now. Do I have the flexibility to take the time? Does my boss understand? And I work in mental health, so my boss did. And then just taking the day. And I think, as a journalist, covering something long-term of crisis proportions like this can be difficult. Covering a big tragedy in the past is difficult. And kind of rotating yourself out of those assignments, or asking to be rotated out, or, as a boss, making sure that your people are not focused too much on back-to-back traumatic assignments, which again, I admit can be very difficult at this time, but everybody needs that downtime to be able to function in their job. And we are no good to the newsroom, we're no good to the communities that we serve if we cannot function. And so recognizing, hey, I need those few hours, I need half a day, I need a day, whether or not you can go anywhere, that's fine. Your brain needs a rest, your heart needs a rest, take it.
Talking about how to take leave when we can't actually go anywhere here as part of our panel on coping with the new normal. I'm Emma Silikans. I'm a board member with ONA NYC. We've had a wonderful panel with us this evening. I was going to say this afternoon, but it's getting dark outside, so I'm going to say this evening. And thanks for sticking with us, everyone that's participating this evening. So we've had Kari Cobham, who is from the Carter Center. She has created a great list of resources that's online on the Carter Center's website. You can find it. It's got information specific to journalists and mental health and coping with coronavirus. Dr. Rodriguez is a licensed psychologist and clinical social worker. He's with the NYU McSilver Institute, has been working with trauma for more than 20 years. And Bené J. Wilson is with, she's the credit cards editor over at The Points Guy. She's also started a great session on Zoom each Wednesday night for journalists of color around talking around their mental health and anything that might be going on for them right now. And that started at the start of COVID-19. We've got another question from the crowd from Heather Chin. Heather is always a great member that we see at a lot of our events, and Heather's now at the Philadelphia Inquirer, although she used to be based in New York with Flipboard. And her question is around dealing with interruption to routines that in and of themselves were coping mechanisms. This might be a good one for Dr. Jim, and then I'll ask another question to the ladies. So Dr. Rodriguez, you're probably very qualified to speak on this, but we will keep it short. How do you deal with interruptions to routines that are in and of themselves a coping mechanism?
Well, it's a little bit hard without an example because I'm trying to clarify that. But
Heather, can you maybe let us know if there's a particular thing that you're dealing with there in the chat? But otherwise, maybe just answer in terms of a general.
Yeah, and if I could understand it, it goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about competing needs, right? So maybe an example is, you know, she might schedule her time to do homeschooling with her children or have to do something that's home related and then be interrupted by work, right? And a deadline or a new deadline or a boss asking for something new. And so that's a good example where making decisions, right, about what can I best handle now? And we heard Kari talking earlier about how she makes those decisions, but I think thinking through and sort of being prepared for how you're going to respond to those kinds of things. And I say that because the response to the boss may be a critical need that you can't shake. And I think what Kari was describing earlier, and I'm going to use Kari as an example, is there's a piece of an assessment that you're making, right? An evaluation in those moments. Is this really something I need to respond to now or not? Can I leave that off? And again, that's where it's individualized, so only you can know those things. But I think sometimes going through that process of asking yourself that question, do I need to interrupt my routine? And then also, I think it's, again, Kari did a much better job describing in real time and with her real experiences how to address these things, but also making some of those decisions and kind of being flexible, of course, and being flexible with yourself, being flexible with your routine.
And just mindful of timing, because I know we're wanting to wrap up soon. There is someone in Australia that's saying it's 10 a.m. there in Australia. Thanks for joining, Nola. And they have to bounce to their office. I know we've still got 43 people on the line, and we've just recently had another 2 people join us, but we will start wrapping up as we go along. So Molly, who has been at many of our ONA NYC events, has a question around the news itself. I don't have the exact wording, but Molly Stark-Dean, for people that don't know Molly, she asked around news itself. So what if, we're all journalists, right? What if news is your coping mechanism? How much news is too much news? How do you control that when it's your job, but it's also something that you're trying to keep informed at this time in this age of coronavirus? Perhaps to the ladies, to Bené and Kari, and if we've got time, Jim will circle back to you as well. So Bené.
Well, with the Points Guy, we write about credit cards, but we also write about travel. So we have had a front row seat to the meltdown of the travel industry. And we all travel too. So we have to write about this. And then we all have to cope with the fact that we can't go on our trips. Kari talked about going on an Alaska cruise. I had a cruise. I had some trips I was going to do this spring, summer, and fall, and they're just all gone. So for that little slice of the world, it can sometimes be a little disheartening to have to continue to write these stories as the industry continues to melt down. And sometimes you just, right now what we're doing is we're kind of pulling some old content to talk about trips that we've been on and tell people, well, you can't go now, but maybe you should start, here's some ideas for when travel comes back. So that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, great. Kari?
So just remind me of your question again.
Oh, we were asking around news. So we're all in the news business,
okay,
right?
gotcha.
And so for some people, information is a coping mechanism, reporting is a coping mechanism. It's also your job, and maybe it's becoming overwhelming right now. What advice would you have to people around the media right now, and how to kind of straddle that?
Right. I think as journalists, we associate so much of who we are with what we do. And it can be difficult to separate ourselves from it because we feel like we need to be in the know of everything that's happening in order to do our jobs, which is true. But there is a line that we can draw on a personal level. And someone in the past 2 weeks described to me what is called, when you scroll through your news feeds and your app notifications and your news apps, is called doom scrolling, right? And I was like, oh, that is so on point, because I'd wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and can't go back to sleep, and I'd start scrolling and catching up on the news. And then by the time 7 o'clock came around, it would shape my entire mood for the day, which in other words is not necessarily a positive or a good mood, because the world is not a good place when you pay attention to that much news all the time. Mean world theory, we know all about it, right? And so I think it's fine to keep up with the news. It's fine to distract yourself, but there are other distractions outside of your job. And even though you think it might be productive, there is a line that it crosses from productivity into messing with your mental health. And so it's okay to set aside some time every day to not focus on that. Or, for me, I have my phone turned off from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and it's in night mode, which means no notifications are coming through unless they're major notifications. And I didn't always have that luxury, right? Because I was in the newsroom, but now I do. So think about, what is that portion of your day that you could not have the news on, that you could not be reading the news, because that is incredibly important. It's almost a mental version of not working in your bed and working somewhere else in your house.
I love the
Do
idea.
that for
And it was
yourself.
called a doom scroll, was it?
Doom scrolling.
Doom scrolling.
Doom scrolling.
Ooh,
Yeah.
we've all been guilty of that one. And we are going to wrap up in a couple of minutes, everyone. We've still got 40 participants that have joined us. If you have any suggestions or recommendations of other panels that you think we should be hosting as part of our work with ONA NYC, perhaps you can drop some suggestions in the chat that we can copy out of there. You can also do so on Facebook a little bit later on as well. So just any suggestions that you have and any more questions that you put in now, we will look at trying to address at a later date. Maybe you have suggestions of panelists that you would think would be really great at this time while we're dealing with COVID-19 to have on. Please make suggestions in the chat or catch us later on Facebook or Twitter at ONA NYC. You can also just hashtag us ONA NYC. I'm Emma Silikans. We have had a great panel here this evening with some super knowledgeable guests. We've had Benet Wilson, who's from the Point Sky. She has joined us from Baltimore, where she is coping with the new normal. She's also hosting those Wednesday night sessions, if you're a journalist of color. You can jump on and just talk about what you're coping with at this time and speaking around that. We've had Dr. Jim Rodriguez, who has joined us from the NYU McSilver Institute. He's been working in the area of trauma for more than 20 years. I believe he's in New York State right now, and he's both a licensed psychologist and clinical social worker, and has given some really pointed advice this evening. We'll share some resources, I believe they're in the chat for you. And Kari Cobham, Cobham, I knew I would do that at some stage tonight. Hopefully I got the enunciation right there, who has been coping at home with kids, and she's been in Atlanta. She's with the Carter Center and has created a great list of resources that you can find online. Just to wrap up the panel this evening, perhaps we can cycle through the three of you and you can leave us with one piece of advice that you'd like us to take away with this evening with coping with the new normal. Benet?
Mine is get dressed every day. I did that before the pandemic. It sets your mind to the work day. So if you're working, resist the temptation to stay in your pajamas or wear I'm not saying put on a ball gown or a tuxedo, but just get dressed every day.
Love it. Jim?
Reflect back on the things that have helped you cope with stressful situations in your life. Think about those things and then really use them now. This is the time where you have to use those. And again, focus on those things that are healthy and that are helpful to you, that help you to get through to get through difficult times.
And Kari Cobham?
I would say just remember that there are no shoulds, to give yourself grace and to find that one small thing that you can do every day that will help you make it through to the next day.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us on the panel this evening, Coping with the New Normal from ONA NYC. And a big thanks especially to Benet J. Wilson, Jim Rodriguez and Kari Cobham, who have been part of our panel. I also have to thank Muckrack. They were involved with helping us organize this panel, and the great volunteers who make up ONA NYC. Thank you so much for all of your help with this as well. There's myself, Emma Silikans, Alita, Mandy, Rabina, Alana, John, Ruben, and Cheryl. I hope that I got everyone there, but behind the scenes, there's a lot that happens to make this come together. I think Megan as well from ONA, the overarching ONA, helped us get on Zoom here this evening. We are hoping that the recording of this has worked and that we can post it for everyone to listen at a later date. A few takeaways that I've taken from this: maybe I need to get on TikTok as a way of trying something new. TikTok, Zoom, Instagram, Slack, Book Club, a few ideas of how you can use tools to help you out with coping with the new normal, more chats, birthday parties with friends through new technology. And the one big takeaway as well I found was just do the thing that works for you. The shower that Kari Cobham mentioned earlier tonight, around just do that thing that feels right for you. It might be a 10-minute shower. It might be going for a run. It may be sitting down and painting your nails every day, but whatever works for you, try and do that right now, because we are coping with this new normal. You can join us after this chat on ONA NYC on Facebook. We normally do a job board at this time, but we're going to post those on our Facebook page. So if anyone has any jobs that they would like to advertise, please feel free to pop them on our Facebook page, and hopefully we can get our journalists that are out of work at the moment into work. Once again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, ONA.
Thank you. Take care. Good night.
Later.
Night.